today's writing notes, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about revision. So revising a paper that you've already written is one of the most important skill sets that a writer can develop. Being able to figure out what's working, what's not working, and why is crucial to building strong papers. Now, I'll give you one specific revision strategy at the end of this video, but the thing I really want to talk to you guys about today is dividing revision into 3 different tiers. So 3 different levels of revision, each of which are going to have their own strategies and each of which are going to have their own concerns. Now, the first tier, the top tier of revision is what I call re-envisioning. So R-E-envision. Re-envision. Now this is when there's something just definitely not working with the paper. Either you don't agree with the argument anymore, which does happen. The structure doesn't support the argument that you're making. The style doesn't work. The tone doesn't work. The evidence you've given proves something totally different. There's totally new evidence that just shoots your argument straight to hell, whatever it is. So this is when you need a total change of the paper. So re-envisioning, top tier, these are big, big changes. So you may totally change your argument, you may reverse it, you may shift it a different direction, you may say, this is a section that I want, there's a section of this argument that I want to be the whole argument, whatever it is. So I'll give you an example. When I was writing my master's thesis, in the 3rd chapter of my master's thesis, I wrote a draft of it, and I said, you know what, of this 25 pages, the last 7 or so are really the only ones that are any good. And so what I did in my 2nd draft was I took those 7 pages and I made those, and I expanded those into the whole chapter. So that was an example of re-envisioning that draft. So it may be a total shift of the argument, it may be a total shift of the structure, whatever it is. You got a lot of options with this. However, one thing to note about re-envisioning, if you have a deadline, maybe not the best idea, because re-envisioning is going to be the most time-consuming of these 3 different forms of revision. The 2nd tier is what I call revising. So this is medium scale changes. So you're looking at things like paragraphs. So this may be moving the order of paragraphs around, or this may be looking within paragraphs. So you may be changing things like topic sentences, you may be adding in or taking out evidence, you may be shifting the organization of the paper around, you may be doing some minor stuff, or some minor like paragraph level stylistic changes, things like this. So this is by and large operating on the paragraph and maybe the sentence level. If it becomes a question of like adding sentences in or taking sentences out, things like that, completely rewriting sentences, that's on the revision level. So this again, very mid-scale stuff. This is going to be, so unless you notice like a major issue that you need to re-envision the paper, this is going to be probably where the bulk of your revising work is done. So this is going to be an important phase. The bottom tier, this is the lowest sort of level of concern, is what I call editing. So editing is generally the kind of stuff we think of as editing, as what an editor would do. So looking at things like mechanics, grammar, punctuation, spelling, capitalization, syntax, splitting infinitives, if that's something you're concerned about, whatever it is. So all of these formatting also, so like the heading of the paper, making sure your title is centered, whatever it is. All of this stuff is editing stuff. And while so re-envisioning is concerned with the overall ideas of the paper and the overall structure of the argument. Revising is concerned with expressing the ideas in an effective and convincing way. Editing is concerned with polish. Now, for me, editing is the least important of these steps, but I don't want to denigrate editing because it is important. Because the reality of it is that people judge you by the way that you write, they judge you by the polish of your writing, they judge you if you've got spelling errors, mechanics errors, whatever it is. Regardless of how good your ideas are, if they're not presented in a polished way, it compromises your ethos as a writer. So you do want to develop some editing skills, but the crucial thing really is to make sure that the ideas are solid. Now, the last thing I want to cover in this video, I want to give you a piece of advice about revising in general. Every semester I tell my classes this: if there was only one piece of advice, if there was only one lesson I could teach about revising, it would be to read your papers aloud. This is the best revising technique I know. And the reason is because when you hear your paper being read, you catch a lot of mistakes that you don't see when you're reading it silently to yourself. I don't know why, but study after study has shown this. So you catch things like awkward phrasing, you catch things like repetition, you catch things like syntax errors, you even catch things like grammar and spelling mistakes, which you wouldn't necessarily think that you would hear, but you do. Now, the key to this, to make this work, is you need to actually read what's written on the page. And this can be challenging because as writers, when we're reading back over something we've written, we tend to read what we meant to write rather than what we've actually put on the page. So one of the key things is to make sure that you actually read what's on the page rather than what you wrote in your head. And there's a couple of ways you can help yourself with this. One is to read to someone. This is actually the best way of doing it, I think. You can read to someone, and this doesn't necessarily have to be like an actual living person. This can be a cat or a houseplant or a Justin Bieber poster or whatever you have. Reading to someone, that sort of performance aspect of it, actually is going to make you focus a lot more on the words on the page. The other thing that you can do is print out 2 copies of your paper, and I do suggest doing this with a printed out copy rather than reading off the screen. I don't know why, again, but it's another one of those things. It's just easier for most people to read in a detailed way, focusing on individual words off a piece of paper than it is off a screen. But you print out 2 copies of your paper, and you give one to another person. So this actually has to be a living person. Justin Bieber poster is not going to do this for you. And you have them follow along with you, and they stop you every time you read what you meant to write rather than what you've actually written. So basically this person's job then becomes to check you as you're reading. So again, reading aloud, this is going to help you actually with all levels of revision, but primarily with revising and editing. So anyway, that's 3 tiers of revision and 1 revision strategy. Hopefully that helps. Thanks for watching.